Well, we have quite a few out this morning, and we got a phone call from Debbie Stark, and she was trying to get a horse up because of the flood, get him out of the water or something like that, and the horse kind of pitched around, which, when it's storming outside, horses get a little ornery, and so the horse bumped into her, knocked her down, broke her arm. Broke it in two places. As Archie Campbell would say, well, she ought to stay out of those places. But she's having a little trouble with it because of the way it broke, so she's got to go in this week for some surgery. And Maggie's also going in this week to get a pacemaker put in. So a lot of things to pray about. Keep them in your prayers. And we'll just keep on doing what we're doing. So last week I said we would talk about who changed the Sabbath to Sunday. And here we are on the seventh day of the week. This is Saturday in America. But if you go to Europe and you look at their calendars, they have changed the calendar. And so Monday is the first day of the week, and Sunday is the seventh day of the week in some of the European calendars. So if the Sabbath wasn't important to keep the seventh day, why did they go to all the trouble to change the calendars? Now, we'll read a scripture later where Satan says he will change times and laws. But when was the Sabbath actually established? We talked about this last week, and I want to go back and just do a real quick recap. And we're going to go to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 1. And we find that the Sabbath was actually established right at creation or recreation. Depends on how you understand that. Genesis 2 verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day. He sanctified it, because in it he rested from all of his work which God had created and made. So when I read that, it looks to me like God established the Sabbath very early there at Mount Sinai. But I wondered, was it reiterated before the giving of the law on Mount Sinai? So let's go to Exodus 16. Exodus chapter 16, verse 21. And this is where the children of Israel had been traveling through the desert. Of course, they were hungry, and so God provided manna for them to eat. So Exodus 16:21, so they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need, and when the sun became hot, it melted. And so it was on the sixth day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Then he said to them, this is what the Lord has said, tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning. So they laid it up until morning as Moses commanded, and it didn't stink. Now, when they tried to gather extra during the week, it rotted very quickly, and it says there were worms in it. So verse 25, then Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath rest to the Lord. You will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. So it looks to me like the Sabbath was a continual thing. It wasn't invented at Mount Sinai. It was established at creation, and it stayed that way and is in continuance even today. So if we go to Exodus 20, verse 8, this is where the Ten Commandments are spelled out. Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You might ask, what makes the Sabbath holy, or what makes any day holy? Well, if God isn't in it, you can't make it holy. God is the only one that can make a day holy, and by asking God to be here, to be with us, to watch over us, to guide us, to give his angels for protection, something we definitely need, that is part of making the Sabbath day holy, because God said he created it for us. So Exodus 28, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your cattle, your stranger who's within your gates. So it's things that you have total control over. Now, if you own a business, this gets a little iffy to figure out. If you own 100% of the business, you actually have control over these people, so you should not allow them to work on the Sabbath. And verse 11 says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and earth, the sea and all that's in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he hallowed it." Not to put, too much a fine point on this, but sometimes when you talk to physicians, people who've been studying the human body for years, they say it actually needs a rest period, and it runs on a cycle of 7 days. Now, it's not real popular, but you can find those articles online, but the body needs some downtime. Otherwise, we just burn ourselves out. And if you've ever noticed people who are extremely wealthy in certain businesses, sometimes they don't live to ripe old ages. They burn themselves out because they just day and night are involved in their businesses, and they neglect their families and everything else. So the question was then, who changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, from the original day of worship to the first day of the week? And you'll be surprised when I tell you who did it, that they actually kept the seventh-day Sabbath for 363 years before they changed it. So that would tell you that Jesus Christ did not change it in the New Testament, or it would have been written about. The Apostle Paul didn't change it in the New Testament because Paul was a prolific letter writer. He would have written about it and informed everybody, hey, by the way, Jesus said we can change this. Well, you won't find that in Scripture. It's just not there. But there is a scripture in Acts 20, verse 7, that people use all the time to justify the Sunday Sabbath. Acts 20, verse 7. And it says, "Now on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread." Okay, what does it say they came together to do? It doesn't say they came together to worship. It doesn't say they came together to take up money, which there are scriptures where they did actually take up collections on the first day of the week for a need. But Paul, continuing, says, "Ready to depart the next day, he spoke to them and continued his message until midnight." Well, why would he have met on the first day of the week? Well, if you follow Paul's teachings and writings, they met with Paul whenever he was available when he was traveling. It could have been midweek. It could have been a Friday. It could have been on the Sabbath. It could have been on a Sunday. It could have been any day of the week. That is no proof to change the Sabbath to Sunday over one scripture. Now, the way God inspires the Bible, he doesn't write it in a childlike story where you can start at the beginning, read to the end, and go, okay, now I know everything I need to know. He simply does not inspire it that way. He does something called line upon line, precept upon precept. And he repeats it, line upon line, precept upon precept. But if you try to take one line out and don't match it up with the rest of the scriptures, you're going to get off track, and you're going to get off track quickly. But the precepts of God are proven throughout the Bible, and they don't contradict themselves. Okay? So by what authority then did this group of people change the Sabbath? Well, we'll get into that a little bit. We know the apostles didn't do it. They didn't change God's holy laws. But like many different traditions that are found in various churches today, they go with this change of the Sabbath. Now, it's not a secret who changed it. Anyone who can do any reasonable research, and the information is very prolific out there. It's not hard to find. The Catholic Church changed the Sabbath to Sunday, and they readily admit that they did. They don't try to deny it. What they do get aggravated at is that the Protestants claim there's scriptural proof to change the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. And they will tell them there is absolutely no proof in Scripture to change the Sabbath to Sunday. We did it. Now, the why they did it we'll get into in just a little bit. But ask yourself, did Jesus Christ anywhere in Scripture give the Catholic Church authority to change anything? And I'll show you the Scripture that they use to do it. Then I'll explain the real reason behind why they did it. So we've already established who changed it. It was done by the Catholic Church. And yes, Constantine was involved in it. But you have to go back and remember when Paul went into Rome, what were all the statues that he saw? They were to gods. And then he comes to one, says, to the unknown God. I mean, they had a statue for every god you can imagine, and even one for a god they didn't know. They said, in case we missed one. And so Paul says, I come to you proclaiming this unknown God because you don't know him. You don't know the one true God of heaven. So these men in Rome thought of themselves as gods. I say little g because they're not actually gods. But out of that thinking and out of those men came the Roman Catholic Church, thinking they're little gods. So therefore, if we're little gods, we have authority over Scripture. We can change it if we don't like it. And they did. All right, I'm going to read some articles that anybody can look up on the internet, and I'll try to give the who wrote them. But according to historical records, the Catholic Church actually changed the Sabbath to Sunday at 363 AD, 363 years after Christ's crucifixion. So that's why I said somebody kept the Sabbath correctly for a very long time, 363 years. It was done at the Council of Laodicea, and they decided on their own to change from Saturday to Sunday, the first day of the week. Now, some of the things that you will hear as excuses, and I've interviewed and talked to Protestants who say, well, no, we don't follow the Catholic teachings of changing the Sabbath. We keep it because Jesus Christ rose on Sunday. Well, guess what next sermon's going to be? When did Jesus Christ actually rise from the tomb? We will use the Scriptures, not tradition, and we can nail it right down to within an hour of when he actually was resurrected, okay? It's not that hard to do, but if you don't understand certain things in Scriptures, you're going to mess it up. All right, here's what this article says from Edinburgh in 1876. It's from A History of the Council of the Churches by Charles J. Heffel. It says, Christians shall not Judaize. So this was part of the reason for changing the Sabbath. The Catholic Church did not want to be associated with anything that had to do with what the Jews were doing. And remember, in the New Testament, things are called Passover of the Jews, Feast of the Jews, because the Jews were the only one of the 12 tribes left with any identity that were keeping any of the Sabbaths, the holy days, the food laws, anything that God had commanded them. So the Catholics wanted to break away from that. So basically it says, Christians shall not Judaize or do anything that a Jew would do and be idle on Saturday, but shall work on that day. But the Lord's day shall specially honor, and if being Christians shall, if possible, do no work on that day. If, however, they are found Judaizing, they shall be shut out from Christ. So that's the way they begin to teach it. Okay? So, as I said earlier, the Protestants call Sunday the Lord's Day because they say Christ rose on that day. But we're going to talk about, is that actually true? Can you prove it? Now, one of the things that I run into, and you will as well, when you talk to people and you use facts and history and everything else, if you challenge their traditions, you'll probably make them mad. And they'll get angry with you, and the door will come down. But if we're doing it as a witness, it doesn't say we're going to convert them or even change their mind. So we'll talk about that next week, so you'll have to tune in next week. But calling Sunday the Lord's Day is actually incorrect because, as we covered last week, the Bible tells us the Sabbath is the Lord's Day and Christ is Lord of the Sabbath. All right, Matthew 12, verse 8, we read that last week. It says, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. So let's go to Isaiah 58. Verse 13, Isaiah 58, 13. And one thing that I encourage people to do, if you're listening to a sermon like this or a teaching lesson like this, go to the Bible, follow along, and try to use a Bible that's reasonably translated. If you're buying some of these newer translations, some of those things are so liberal, you can't get any doctrinal truth out of them at all. King James, the New King James are pretty good. After that, they start to get a little bit iffy. Isaiah 58, verse 13, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day. So the Sabbath is called a holy day. There's another name for holy days in the Bible, and we'll talk about that next week. Call the Sabbath a delight. Well, it is a delight for us. When we miss 2 weeks in a row, we can't hardly wait to get back to see somebody to talk to, somebody to visit with, somebody that's like-minded. We can, talk about different things. So the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, not finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words. Then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. And says, the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So God made certain promises to the children of Israel. And when we went through the 2 covenants, we talked about how the first covenant God made with Israel was based on physical promises. If they would do certain things, follow his laws, keep his commandment, then he would provide for them, protect them, and everything else. And so the Old Testament is rather large, and it's full of history. And when Israel did follow God's instructions, they were protected and they did well. But you can also read what happens when they turned away from God. They fall into captivity, and eventually they kind of lose their identity. So at one time, the information about the Catholic Church changing the Sabbath day was actually in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And I have a set, probably the last set that has that information in them, and they're from 1911. They're 114 years old. Now, I don't handle them because the leather bindings on them is pretty brittle. But I did 20-some years ago bookmark with a yellow sticky the information about the Sabbath so I can get to it pretty easy without having to thumb through the pages. But they weren't ashamed of this changing of the Sabbath. But then, political correctness, they stopped putting things like that in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And people, I don't know if people even buy them today or not. But before the internet, that was how you got your information, was from the Encyclopedia Britannica. Go to the library, and they were great books. They really are. Now, the set I have, I wouldn't call them all that great because they have no pictures in them. And the English is very hard to read because of the J's, the S's, and the F's are different. And so you almost have to know what the word is before you try to read it. But you can make it out if you work at it. All right, so back to the Catholic Church admitting they changed the Sabbath. And this is from Cardinal Gibbons. He says, is Saturday the seventh day? This is people writing in and asking him questions. So they ask him, is Saturday the seventh day according to the Bible and the 10 Commandments? And he says, I answer yes. Is Sunday the first day of the week? And did the church change the seventh day, Saturday, for Sunday, the first day? He says, again, I answer yes. They ask him, did Christ change that day? He said, I answer no. Well, right there are 3 things that should tell you if you're not keeping the seventh day Sabbath, you're keeping the wrong day. All right, let's continue on. And this is from the Catholic Virginian, October 1947. It says, for example, nowhere in the Bible do we find that Christ or the apostles ordered that the Sabbath be changed from Saturday to Sunday. We have the commandment of God given to Moses to keep holy the Sabbath day. That is the seventh day of the week, Saturday. Today, most Christians keep Sunday because it was revealed to them by the Roman Catholic Church outside of the Bible. But I don't buy into the Roman Catholic Church having authority to do that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. This is from the Catechism of Catholic Doctrine, 1957, page 50. Question, which is the Sabbath day? Answer, Saturday is the Sabbath day. Question, why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? Answer, we observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. Okay, they're pretty bold about it. This is from a book called Things Catholics Are Asked About, page 136. Nowhere in the Bible is it stated that worship should be changed from Saturday to Sunday. Now the church, this would be the Catholic Church, instituted by God's authority, according to them, Sunday as the day of worship. This same church, by the same divine authority, taught the doctrine of purgatory long before the Bible was made. kind of make up their own stuff. They don't get it out of the Bible. We have, therefore, the same authority for purgatory as we have for Sunday, and I would say, yes, you do, but two wrongs don't make a right. All right. Not trying to make fun of anyone. There is a scripture in Revelation that says that Satan will deceive the whole world. Okay? Nobody goes around with a sign said, I might be deceived. They just don't. Now, last time I was in Tyler, Texas, I was talking to Charles Gross, and I said, can even God's elect be deceived? He said, yes, absolutely. He said, if we don't stay vigilant, if we don't read our Bibles, if we don't pray, he said, yeah, we can be deceived. We can get caught up in things that's going on in the world and get deceived just like anyone else. And so we have to be careful. In fact, if you look at the Laodicean error that's mentioned in Revelation, that's basically what happens. Church gets complacent. Yeah, we've got everything we need. We're rich. We're wealthy. We don't need too much. And that's what happens. All right, from 1893, more quotes. The Catholic Church, more than 1,000 years before the existence of a Protestant, by view of her divine mention, changed the day from Saturday to Sunday. That was 1,000 years before the Protestants rebelled. Now, the thing that I have a hard time getting my head around, the Protestant Reformation was about the Catholic Church not having authority to change scriptures. And you'll find the words sola scriptura, meaning scripture only. They did not want changed doctrines set by the Catholic Church. But when they revolted and came out, they kept the Sunday worship, they kept Easter, they kept Christmas, they kept all of the things that the Catholic Church had added to Scripture that are not in the Bible. That dumbfounds me. This is from May 21st, 1995. This article is not very old. St. Catherine Catholic Church Sentinel. Perhaps the boldest thing, the most revolutionary change the church ever did, happened in the first century. Well, it really wasn't in the first century. It wasn't until about 300 years, 363. The holy day, the Sabbath, was changed from Saturday to Sunday. So it's called the boldest thing they ever did. It was chosen not from any direction noted in Scripture, but from the church's sense of its own power. They gave it self-power. Okay? This is from a priest, Priest Brady, March 18th, 1903. It is well to remind Presbyterians, Baptists, Methodists, and all other Christians that the Bible does not support them anywhere in their observance of Sunday. Sunday is an institution of the Roman Catholic Church, and those who observe the day observe a commandment of the Catholic Church. That's pretty plain, okay? Now, I have questioned Sunday-keeping people. Oh, no, we don't follow the Catholics at all. No, this is the Lord's Day. Okay, if they're deceived, and you're not going to change them. It just takes God's calling to do that. So, when was it actually prophesied that something like this would happen? If we go to Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, you probably know where I'm going here. Daniel 7:25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Satan is pretty good at that. He's pretty good at causing all kinds of problems, and eventually he can wear people out. That's why we have to stay close to God. But it says he will think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. And that's from the King James Version. Well, time is 1 year. Times would be 2 years, so 2 plus 1 is 3. The dividing of time is a half year, so that makes 3.5 years. So this is speaking probably of a future time, but Satan has been working on this for a long time. It's not new. Let's go to Matthew 15, verse 7. Matthew 15:7. Now Jesus is talking to the scribes and the Pharisees and some of the so-called really good law keepers, and he said, "Hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, These people draw near me with their mouth. Now, think about what this is saying. People go to church and they sing these great and wonderful praise songs and wave their hands and dance and have a great time. You know, they're enjoying themselves. They honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Well, the problem here is we claim God, we talk about God, but we don't do what God says. In vain, verse 9, they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. So this commandment by the Catholic Church to keep Sunday as the Sabbath would be a commandment of men, not a commandment of God. Let's go to Matthew 7:21. Picking up on that thought of, they honor me with their mouth, their words. Matthew 7:21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. And I've given sermons on holy days and things about what is the will of the Father, and we'll probably repeat those because it's good to know what that is. But verse 22, many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And I look at all the good that a lot of the Sunday-keeping churches do. They have missions, they have homeless shelters, they have food drives. They do a lot of good work, so I'm not judging their work. But here's what Christ says. Verse 23, and I will declare to them, I never knew you. I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness, which would mean those who basically don't keep God's laws. Verse 24, therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I'll liken him to a wise man who built his house on a rock. And then he goes through the parable of the wise builders. But who's the rock here that he's talking about? Because this is important to understand. All through Scripture, Jesus Christ is the rock or the foundation or the cornerstone. Everything has to be built upon him, not false doctrines, not false teachings, not altered scriptures or man's will. We build on Jesus Christ as the foundation. James chapter 2, verse 10. James 2 and verse 10. People like the Ten Commandments. Used to, when we were in school, I think we sold plaques with the Ten Commandments on them. I don't know that you could do that today. It was a fundraiser for something that we did in school. But James 2:10 says, for whoever shall keep the whole law and yet offend in one point, he's guilty of all of them. There's no such thing as big sins, little sins, black sins, white sin. Sin is just sin. It's just a transgression of God's law. Pretty simple. But while we're on the Ten Commandments, there was also another change made by the Catholic Church to the commandments as well. They actually removed one of them. And guess which one that was? The one that has to do with idols. And if you go to a Catholic sanctuary, you will find all kinds of statuary and idols. And so they split the 10th in order to keep 10 commandments. But God didn't give them the authority to do that. They took that upon themselves. So the Catholic Church actually changed the Sabbath to Sunday because they claimed the first day of the week is the new Sabbath because of Christ's resurrection. And we're going to talk about that next week in our sermon next week. But there's actually no Bible verse to support that change. It's simply the invention of the Roman Catholic Church. So, for a church to claim that it's above the Bible, how can anyone be above God? That's not possible. And if you don't believe the Bible is God's inspired word, then close the book and go home. Why are we here? So Scripture talks about, the world being drunken with the wine of Babylon, which is actually false doctrines and false teachings. And that's actually out of Revelation 18, verse 4. We're not going to go there, but you can read that on your own. But we do have a choice. When we hear things like today's message, I encourage you to go look up everything that I've said. Prove it to yourself. I don't suggest you ever listen to just a person in the pulpit giving you a message. You should always prove it to yourself and be convinced in your own mind. But you do have a choice. Will you obey God, or are you going to follow man's teachings? So if you're keeping Sunday as a Sabbath, you're following man's teachings. You're following the Roman Catholic Church, and that is their doctrine. All right, let's go back to where the Catholic Church thinks they get the authority to do this. Let's go back to Matthew 16. All you have to do is twist one scripture, and you're there. Matthew 16:19. And it says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Now, this is actually referring to a future time, at least in my understanding, when Jesus Christ says he's going to turn the kingdom over to the saints. And whatever you bind on earth, it says, will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This translation is actually wrong. It should read, whatever you bind on earth must already be bound in heaven. In other words, it has to agree with the law of God. We can't bind and unbind anything if it's in contrast to God's law and it disagrees with God's law. So there are people that know how to research these languages and get the syntax right. And it says, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. There are things that we need to bind and unbind on earth regarding things that go wrong. Let's go to Matthew 16:13. So when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? So the Son of Man then being Jesus Christ. And they answered and said, some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and some Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And then Christ says to them, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, and that name's going to be important. We're going to bring it up again here in just a little bit. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And so this is part of the problem. If God does not reveal things to someone, he's not calling them, and he doesn't intend for them to understand. Sometimes that's a little hard for us to get our head around. But verse 18, continuing on, also I say to you, you are Peter. Now, it's interesting how he words this. So he's talking to him, and he doesn't call him Simon Bar-Jonah anymore. I say to you, you are Peter, or your name is Peter, or going to be Peter. And on this rock, now remember in Greek, there is no punctuation. So it's easy to run two thoughts together and make this sound like he's saying, Peter, you're the rock. He's not. He says, I'm telling you, your name is Peter, not Simon Bar-Jonah. And on this rock, speaking of himself, I will build my church. Jesus Christ says he is the cornerstone, the foundation. He says, and the gates of Hades or the grave shall not prevail against it. And then again, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So if he gives us the keys of the kingdom of heaven, we have control, but it has to agree with God's authority. We don't get to set out on our own and start making up things, like many churches have done today, by simply taking that one line out of context to make it say something it was not inspired to say. Now, there's a second mention of this, and it'll help clear up some of the context. Matthew 18:15. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him your fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. So it's not unreasonable to say that occasionally we offend somebody with something we say and we didn't even intend to. So you talk it out and then everything's okay. But if he will not hear you, and that happens, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every word may be established. And so you can prove, look, I went to him, I asked forgiveness, I apologized, and the two witnesses said, well, it wouldn't have anything to do with it, he wouldn't forgive him. So 17, if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. And then it goes back into verse 18. Surely whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So if Verse 19, again, I say to you that if two of you agree on earth concerning anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. Now, I put some things in parentheses like, well, when will this happen? Who was the power given to? Was he speaking to the apostles? And it doesn't really say. Verse 20, for where two or three are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. So from just one mistranslated scripture, the Catholic Church derived their entire power to change the Bible, change the commandments, change the Sabbath day. But Mark 2:27, I'm going to keep making this point over and over when we talk about the Sabbath. Mark 2:27. He said to them, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. And as I said, with Jesus Christ being Lord of the Sabbath, why would he do away with it? That would make absolutely no sense. So we have quite the mess of teachings on earth today. We have 99.9% of church attendees going on Sunday. And people have looked at me and said, well, how could the whole world be wrong? And you guys think that you're right. Well, it says Satan deceives the whole world, and if possible, even the very elect. So God isn't calling everyone right now, and people think, well, Satan is winning. Satan isn't winning anything. God is working with first fruits only. And so we will eventually get into that message on first fruits, explain to you what that is, and when the rest of the world then comes into the picture. It's a big plan, but God knows what he's doing. So we're going to talk next week then about, did Christ rise early on Sunday morning, or was it at some other time? We're going to use the scriptures only to get rid of the lies that's been perpetuated for years. And when you perpetuate a lie long enough, what happens? It becomes the accepted truth. And people stop looking for the truth. And sometimes even when they see the truth, they can't find it. So tune in next week, and we'll answer that question. So let me get my hymnal, and we'll sing another song.